Good evening. We're going to be in Genesis 37 tonight, still looking at lessons from the life of Jacob. No surprise there. I didn't realize how long I've been going on this. I'm going to have to wrap it up pretty soon. I had a friend in college that he had his whole life mapped out as a freshman. He knew exactly what grades he was going to get. He was going to make the dean's list every semester. He had an early graduation date planned. He knew what job he was going to do. The only thing he didn't know about his wife was her name. She knew what her faith would be. He knew the color of her hair, how tall she was going to be, what her interests were going to be, which I thought was a little extreme. He managed his money super well, too. I remember one day I was going to go to Dairy Queen and get a Blizzard. I asked him if he wanted one. He's not the kind to really splurge, but he said, yeah, you know what, I think I will. And so he gave me some cash, and I was walking off, and he said, bring back a receipt. Only freshman I know that would want a receipt for his Blizzard. Now, this friend, I admire him a lot. Goals are good. He ordered his life well. Many of the things that he has set out to do, he's accomplished, and his life still to this day is going very well. But I expect there's going to be some things in his life that he didn't plan. Probably already has, I'm sure. It's true that life goes very different than we plan it. Isn't that true? Things that we never thought would happen, they do. Things we never saw coming, usually those negative things that we think happen to somebody else, they come to us. And it changes everything. Things are never the same from that point on. To this point in my life, I haven't had a whole lot of that, something that's just been a redefining moment. But try to think about how to use this word, my heroes. Okay, there's one hero. Okay? My hero is Jesus. But besides Jesus, my heroes are those of you that have had those events that are those tragic events that come into your life that you never would have planned. And they change everything from that point on. And you stay steady in your faith and you move forward, just trusting God and serving Him. You're my heroes. That's how life goes. Our text today is one of those events in the life of Jacob. It's one of those moments that you're never the same after this. You never would have planned it, didn't see it coming, not supposed to happen, and when it does, never the same after that. This is one of those stories. We're going to look at it in three scenes. The first scene, very familiar to us, the coat of many colors. Chapter 37, verse 1. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Now, I underlined these are the generations of, because I want to remind you, that's a heading in the book of Genesis. It's 11 times in Genesis. It's a marker of a new section. And it shows up particularly, we started the series talking about this, at the beginning of Abraham's portion of the story. There's that marker. Then when you move into the beginning of Jacob's story, there's that marker. And now, here's the marker again. And I mentioned last week the section on Jacob is closing. The next section is of Joseph. So Jacob's kind of fading from the spotlight at this point. Now the narrative is turning to his son Joseph. So that's where we're at. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Okay, so Israel loved Joseph more than all the other brothers. Joseph is the son of Rachel, that beloved wife of Jacob, and last section we looked at, she died. That special love he had for her is transferred now to her sons, Joseph and Benjamin. So he's got a special love for him. He's born late in life to to this wife that he loved so much, who's now passed. And this is really something he learned from his parents. Israel's parents modeled this kind of favoritism. Isaac loved Esau, right? And Rebekah loved Jacob. So he's doing what he learned. And in that special favor, Jacob made Joseph a robe of many colors, or an ornate robe. The Hebrew text could be a robe with long sleeves or an ornamented tunic. It has royal connotations. You might say, well, where did this coat of many colors, where did that language come from? Well, when the Old Testament was translated into Greek, the Septuagint, it was translated as multicolored robe. So that's where that came from. But that doesn't really matter. The point is that it was a special robe, and the other brothers didn't get one. So they hated him. Couldn't even speak peacefully with him. Think, well, I've seen that before, right? That's how Esau was toward Jacob. Hated him, wanted to kill him. Before that, Cain, remember? Wanted to murder. Well, he did murder his brothers. We see this hate, this jealousy takes a murderous turn repeatedly in the story, as it does in this one. We're seeing jealousy here. It says, when they saw that their father loved him more. They're jealous of that love. I love, I've mentioned Chad Bird a few times. I've read quite a bit of him in studying Jacob. He calls this the coat of many jealousies, because that's what we're looking at. We're seeing jealousy in these hearts. Look at the way he describes it, Chad Bird. Jacob didn't just spend a little extra time playing baseball with Joseph at the park or take him fishing on more weekends than the other boys. No, Jacob basically hung a brightly flashing neon sign on Joseph that shouted the words, "My favorite boy." He's making it very plain. This is my favorite. It's not subtle. It's really clear, and it is stirring up jealousy, as it often does where there is some partiality. Now, I want to pause the story there for a minute and just make a little bit of life application and think about partiality some. God shows no partiality, and he instructs his people to be impartial. We learn from the character of God how we're supposed to be, and it's very clear. A few scriptures, Romans 2:11 says, "For God shows no partiality." He's talking about Jews and Gentiles. The household code in Ephesians chapter 6, a really radical thing to talk about slaves and masters. And the way that Paul addresses the master is he says, "Masters, do the same to them, to your servant, and stop your threatening, knowing that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and that there is no partiality with him." The way that God views your servant should change the way you view your servant. And you should treat him the way you would treat Christ, the same way that he is to treat you. James says, "My brothers, show no partiality as you hold the faith in our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory." And of course, he's talking about rich and poor. It's all over Scripture. God is not partial, so we've got to be careful that we are not partial, whether we're talking about kids or between the rich and the poor or different, whatever it might be, the different ways that we evaluate people in life. Jacob is wrong. This is a clear wrong on his part to have favoritism for one son over the others. But we can't place all the blame in this story on him because his sons are wrong too. And what unfolds in the story is on them. They are responsible, just like when God came to Cain, said, "Sin is crouching at your door." They are responsible for what they're going to do with their jealousy. But we're seeing fault all the way around in here, and I can't help but wonder, knowing where the story goes, if Jacob ever felt some regret. If he ever looked back on that coat, the special love, and thought, I didn't think it was a big deal. I don't know, might think about that in all kinds of ways in life. Not necessarily partiality, it could be anything. There are unwise ways of living that seem to have no real significant repercussions in the moment. but they do later. There are things that it just looks like a gift, It's just a coat. What could be wrong with that? Well, in time, it proves to be far more than that. That's why we don't just deal with those things that look obviously wrong, but we seek to gain wisdom and to say, what's the wise thing to do? What is unwise? Scene 2, interesting dreams. We're not going to read all of this because the story is shifting to Joseph. I'm going to kind of focus us in on Jacob here, the snapshots of Jacob that we get. In verses 5 through 9, Joseph, who the story is now about, begins to have these dreams. And as a result, he tells the dreams, and what we might call brotherly hate, it abounds, it compounds. They hated their brother. He was a tattletale. He was the favorite boy. Now he's got these audacious dreams where they're bowing down to him. Not only that he has them, but then he tells them. I mean, it's hard to like a guy like that, right? They hate him. He is presenting this dreams where he is greater than his family, and his family is bowing down. And eventually he tells it to his father. That's where we pick up in verse 10. But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. Oh, now we see a couple of responses here. First, his father rebuked him. What's going on there? Well, he sees the same thing that the brothers do. That's audacious. I mean, it's almost like he's saying, I love you, son, but, have you ever heard that? I love you, but that's not how this is going to go. This is not how it works. It doesn't work that way. We don't bow down to you. I mean, you're a special son and all, got the robe. I love you. You're my favorite. Got the sign on. But it's not going to go that way. But then it kind of changes. Verse 11, there's like an openness there. His father kept the saying in mind. It's like, His initial response is, sorry, kid, not how this is going to go. But then, that's interesting. See, I call it interesting dreams, because interesting is what people say when they're not real sure what they think about. They go, that's an interesting sermon. Yeah. Not real sure what I think about that. And you sense that in Jacob here. It's like, yeah, that's not how this is going to go. I don't know. Maybe there's more going on here. I think I'm going to tuck that one away. Now, it's interesting, too, because when we read the New Testament, we get to the Gospels, we get to Luke chapter 12, that scene that Luke includes when Jesus is 12 years old, the one when he got left in the temple, and his parents go looking for him, and they found him after 3 days, and he's amazing the teachers with his understanding and his answers. Do you remember what Mary did when she found him? She rebuked him. I'm sure she hugged him, but she rebuked him. She got onto him. Why have you treated us this way? We've been searching in great distress. And Jesus said, why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house? It says they didn't understand, but then you remember this. Mary treasured up all these things in her heart. Now, when you compare the story we're reading now in the Greek translation, the Septuagint, with Luke, which is also in Greek, those same words are used. The words for treasured up, kept in mind. These things, the saying, they're the same words. There's a little bit of link there. I don't know. That's just kind of a curious thing to me. I'm just sort of interested in that. But in both cases, what we're seeing is somebody whose initial response is to go, this is not how this works, boy. I love you, but you don't do this. Maybe there's more going on than what I see. Maybe there's something special happening here. Again, just pause, little life application. I just stop and kind of think, where do I need to hear this in my life? So I'm going to say it this way and then explain what I'm thinking. God's work may be displayed in ways not initially recognizable to us, and particularly in the way that we look at people. And just to kind of keep with that theme of partiality, I think sometimes the reason that we're partial is because we make quick evaluations of people based on how they behave or how they speak or how they look. I was thinking about the story in John 9. There's a man born blind, and everyone was sure what that meant. Either he sinned or his parents sinned. But Jesus said, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. From human vantage point, we go, oh yeah, I know what that is. I know what that's about. It's about sin. There's something else going on. God displaying his goodness in a person. And I think it ought to give us pause in the way we look at one another and other people. Do I make quick evaluations based on the way a person dresses or the way they speak or the way they act or something they've done that leads me to the conclusion about what God is doing or not doing in their life? Could it be that maybe God's up to something more than what I see with my eyes? I think, I've mentioned this before, I think it's important with our children that we recognize God's doing more in them than what we see. And we want to attune them to his voice. He's leading them into life. What is he going to do with our kids? Probably more than what we imagine. It's true with everybody. God's up to, I think we need to have a few more moments where we pause and go, I wonder what God might be doing in this person's life. Third scene, shattered. Verse 12 and following, I'm going to kind of summarize. Jacob sends Joseph to check on his brothers who are pasturing the flock near Shechem. You know the story. He's on his way. They see him from far away. And remember that jealousy, that hatred? They conspire to kill him. Reuben, the oldest, kind of a redeeming moment for him because he's not had real pleasant stories about him recently. Redeeming moment. He convinces them, hold off on this plan. Let's just put him in this pit. And Reuben has a secret plan that he's going to rescue Joseph from those evil plans. But before he can, the other brothers sell him to a passing caravan of foreigners for 20 shekels. And of course, we notice the link to Jesus there. There's a foreshadow, I think, of Jesus who would be betrayed by Judas for 30 pieces of silver, both of those being the price of a slave. Just notice those links, just little connections along the way. So Reuben, he's trying to save him. He does, I guess, save him from dying, but he ends up getting sold to this caravan. So he's gone. They kept his robe, that special coat. They kept it. Let's pick up verse 31. Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in the blood. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, "This we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not." And he identified it and said, "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without a doubt torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning." Thus his father wept for him. I keep thinking every week I think, well, that's got to be the hardest story in Genesis to preach on. Then I come to the next one and go, oh, that's harder. And this is hard. And that is awfully low. It doesn't get much lower than that right there. First, they convince their dad that he is staring at his son's blood. Then they try to comfort him. The duplicity in the human heart is shocking. And it's this theme of deceitfulness that runs all through the Jacob narrative. We see it here in all its ugliness. And Jacob's heart is shattered. Now, I think it gets harder when you think about it this way. We know what Jacob doesn't know. His children know what he doesn't know. He's the only one in the story who doesn't know that his son is actually alive. But if you put yourself in his shoes, his son is dead. And it feels like permanent grief. He refused to be comforted. He says, essentially, I will be grieving till I die. I will be mourning when I go to the grave. It's permanent. Thus his father wept for him. Indescribable grief. I came across this quote. It's a longer quote than I normally share, but it's really thought-provoking. This is from a guy named Thomas Lynch, who is a poet and an undertaker. That's an interesting combination. Operated a mortuary in Michigan in the 1970s. This is interesting what he says. When we bury the old, we bury the known past. The past we imagine sometimes better than it was, but the past all the same, a portion of which we inhabited. Memory is the overwhelming theme, the eventual comfort. But burying infants, we bury the future. Unwieldy and unknown, full of promise and possibilities, outcomes punctuated by our rosy hopes. The grief has no borders, no limits, no known ends. And the little infant graves that edge the corners and fence rows of every cemetery are never quite big enough to contain that grief. Some sadnesses are permanent. It's awfully hard to read. Last week, we talked about chapter 35, and there's a series of deaths recorded there that we looked at. It was burying the old, his connection to his mom, burying his dad. But here, he's burying his boy. It's very different. It's not an infant, but it's different. Of course, he's not actually burying him. I think it's worse. He didn't have his boy to bury. I mean, this is just shattering grief. It's one of those events that it's different than when your father or your mother dies. It's like your future's gone. It's buried. And that line there, some sadnesses are permanent. Well, that's how it feels. The sadness is not permanent. And there's a lot more we ought to say on this, but I'm not going to. I just want to say that. Sadness is not permanent. In this life, there's a permanence to it. It's going to be with you from here on. When those things happen, I've not been there, but I know God helps you. I know gradually you come to feel His comfort and not just the pain, but the grief is there and it's always with you. It's permanent in that sense. But it's not permanent in the big picture. There's more to the story than just this life. We know the rest of the story of Jacob. We know that the next word in the next verse is meanwhile. There's something else going on. God is still working. And this story is actually pointing to the great Redeemer, Jesus, the one who is not dead. He is not dead. And we look at him, and that's our hope, that we know, as permanent as it feels, as much as it feels like our future is buried, it's never buried. There is a future. It is sure. Now, this is not the way Jacob envisioned his life going, I'm pretty sure. And I would imagine that he had regrets. I would imagine he looks back and he says, what if? What if I hadn't made that robe? Oh, man, don't carry that. You can't live like that. We all do our best. We all do things that we can't undo. We can't carry that load. Instead, we look forward to a merciful God and a powerful resurrection, a sure and certain hope that there is a future. We have it on the word of Jesus. I'll leave you with these words, John 14, 1 through 4. Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. And you know the way to where I'm going. You know the way. Keep your eyes fixed there. The grief feels permanent. The sadness feels permanent, but it's not. You have it on the word of Jesus. If we can do anything for you tonight, your heart's heavy, we just need to pray with you. Got time to do that. If you're not a Christian, you want to put your faith in him. There's a lot more to life than this life. You want to think about eternity. Don't put off a decision about that. Let's do it tonight if you need to. Come to the front while we stand and sing.